You know, for centuries, when you think of immense wealth and power, there's one name that's basically been synonymous with it all: Rothschild. We're talking about a family that built an empire of finance and held on to an unbelievable amount of influence for generations.
But here's the thing. Their story doesn't start in some grand palace. No, not at all. It begins in a cramped, 18th century Jewish ghetto in Frankfurt. Just to give you an idea of how restrictive this was, the people living there were literally barred from owning land, they couldn't farm, they couldn't even deal in everyday goods like silk or fresh fruit.
And yet somehow, from that incredibly restrictive beginning, they rose up to influence global politics, to finance entire empires, and even to fund the wars that would go on to shape the modern world. I mean, their power became the stuff of legend. It felt like there was nothing they couldn't reach.
So the big question is, how on earth did they do it? How does one family, starting with basically nothing, build the most powerful and long-lasting banking dynasty in history? Well, that's exactly what we're going to dive into.
Okay, so the whole story really kicks off with one guy, the family patriarch Mayer Amschel Rothschild. Now, he started out as a simple textile trader, but he was never going to be happy with just making small profits. He was always on the hunt for something much, much bigger.
Mayer was this incredibly shrewd trader, and he figured out a strategy that we'd now call front-running. It's pretty genius, actually. Let me break it down for you. His main client was this guy, Prince William. So whenever the prince wanted to buy gold coins, Mayer would first use borrowed money to go buy those exact coins for himself. Then he'd turn around and sell them to the prince. So he's acting as both the buyer and the seller. He's making money twice, once from his commission and a second time from the price jump that he himself just created. Think about it. This is an age with no high-speed trading, no regulations. It was a totally revolutionary way to corner a small market and pretty much guarantee you'd make a profit.
And wow, did it work. By the late 1700s, Mayer was the richest man in all of Frankfurt. But here's the key thing to understand about him. It was never just about the money. For him, money was just how you kept score. What he really wanted was something way bigger, a global family dynasty that would outlive entire nations and empires.
Right. So Mayer knew that if he was going to build a real dynasty, Frankfurt wasn't going to be enough. He had to think bigger. He needed an international footprint. And this is where we see his master plan really take shape.
So what does he do? He sends 4 of his 5 sons out into the world, placing them like chess pieces in the great financial capitals of Europe: Vienna, Naples, Paris, and of course the big one, London. His oldest son, Amschel, stayed behind in Frankfurt to hold down the fort. Now you gotta understand, this wasn't just about opening new branches. This was the creation of a private, continent-wide network for both banking and intelligence. Nothing like it had ever existed. Each of these houses was an independent partner, but they all shared information and money freely with each other, keeping it all inside a tight, closed family loop.
To really see this family genius at work, let's zoom in on his son Nathan over in London. Nathan didn't just get involved in the booming textile industry, he basically took control of the whole supply chain. He supplied the raw materials to the manufacturers, then he'd supply the dye, and then he'd take the finished goods and sell them himself.
He put it perfectly himself. He said, "So I got 3 profits instead of 1, which meant he could sell goods cheaper than anybody." Just think about that. He took an initial £20,000 stake from his dad and, in no time at all, turned it into $60,000. He was building this reputation as the guy who could make things happen when nobody else could.
Okay, so this incredible network and growing power, it was all about to be put to the ultimate test. Europe gets plunged into the Napoleonic Wars, and for the Rothschilds, this was both their biggest challenge and, as it turns out, their greatest opportunity.
The Rothschilds knew something that's still true in finance today. Information is everything, and speed is king. So they built their own private courier network. We're talking boats, horses, even carrier pigeons. That was actually faster than any government's messenger system. This incredible information advantage meant they were always one step ahead of the market, which made speculating on currency their single most profitable business.
And here is a perfect example of their power in action. So the Duke of Wellington is out there fighting Napoleon, right? And his army is on the brink of collapse because he can't pay his troops. He needs gold, and he needs it badly. The British government, they turn to one man, Nathan Rothschild. So Nathan gets his hands on a huge amount of gold. And then, using that incredible family network, he does what everyone thought was impossible. He smuggles the gold through enemy territory in France and gets it directly to Wellington's army. Nathan himself later called it the best business I ever did. And I mean, can you blame him? This single act pretty much cemented the family's legendary status.
So for decades, the Rothschilds were just untouchable. They dominated European finance, and there was no one who could even come close. But as the 19th century rolled on, a new financial power started rising up across the Atlantic. A new challenger was about to enter the ring, ready to take on their global supremacy. And that was the House of Morgan. You really couldn't find two more different approaches to finance. On one hand, you have the Rothschilds. That's the old world model. Their power base is in Europe, everything is about tight family control and absolute discretion. Then you have the Morgans. They're the new world, the face of pure American ambition. They used public money to form huge syndicates and were all about aggressive, very public expansion.
And it was pretty much inevitable that their paths would cross. And it happened during one of America's worst ever financial crises. It was called the Panic of 1893. A collapse in the railroad market set off this massive depression. Now, President Cleveland was dead set on keeping the U.S. on the gold standard, meaning every single dollar had to be backed by actual gold. The problem? By early 1895, the U.S. government was almost out of gold. The entire country was just days away from defaulting on its debt. It was a complete disaster waiting to happen.
So with the entire country on the brink of collapse, J.P. Morgan knew there was only one place in the world with enough gold to stop the bleeding: the Rothschilds. And so, in this incredible historical moment, you have these two rival dynasties teaming up. They work together to supply the U.S. government with 3.5 million ounces of gold, literally saving the nation from financial ruin.
But as the calendar flipped to the 20th century, the old world that the Rothschilds had mastered was starting to fall apart. Now they were facing threats from all sides, internal family feuds, and from the outside, two absolutely devastating world wars.
And the challenges they faced were just immense. I mean, first you had the World Wars, which put different branches of the family on opposite sides of the conflict for the very first time. You can imagine the strain on family loyalty. Then the Nazis came to power and seized all their Austrian assets, forcing many of them to literally flee for their lives. On top of that, there were internal battles. A younger generation wanted to modernize the business, but they were clashing with the old guard who valued total family control above all else. And if that wasn't enough, public scandals, like a connection to the disgraced businessman Robert Maxwell, started to chip away at that legendary reputation for privacy they had spent 200 years building. The world they knew, the world of private banks and monarchies, was just disappearing.
So, how in the world did they manage to survive all of that? Well, they didn't do it by trying to be the biggest or the most aggressive bank out there. Instead, they went back to basics. They returned to the core principles that Mayer had laid down centuries before: discretion, family unity, and maybe most importantly, always thinking long-term. They consolidated their businesses, they hunkered down and weathered the storms, and they found a way to adapt to a brand new financial world.
And that really leaves us with one final fascinating question. In our world today, which is all about constant disruption and chasing the next quarterly earnings report, is the Rothschilds' greatest secret, the key to their incredible survival, really that simple? Is it just that they learned to think in centuries, not quarters?